My friend's family owned a cabin in the mountains, one that he often vacationed at to go hunting, camping, and hiking. Now my friend, let's call him Carter, finally got permission to invite people for a weekend without having adult supervision. This was a sort of congrats for him, and by extension the rest of us, getting accepted into a good college. Then there was the ever-present angle of seeing what we would be like when left on our own, say in dorm life, for example. All we really cared about, though, was getting a weekend away from our families, no matter what reasoning was behind it. It took 2 cars to get the 6 of us and all of our things up there. Carter was driving the lead car, with our friends Logan and Ray with him. I was the driver of the following car with my girlfriend Joanna and our friend Sam. We pulled up to the cabin as the sun had already set over the horizon. Given the time of year, while we had expected the sunlight to leave us early, we had messed up a little on the exact time of our arrival. Ray stayed outside so that we could all get our things in without having to be too worried about the surrounding area of darkness. With only the lights from the street lights that were partially blocked from the road, it was difficult to see. Not to mention it was cold, but we weren't concerned about that, for that was something we'd prepared for. Once everything was inside and the cars were locked up, we made a quick meal and sat around the table in the dining area. Although we knew that if we didn't get our things away that night, we would never, we still just sat around the table with our drinks in one hand and forks in the other. The cabin itself had a gorgeous interior, with a fireplace, a fully renovated kitchen and dining area, a comfortable living room with various couches and chairs, and a back porch that led out to the yard. Upstairs was an expanse of bedrooms, and then there was the small attic, which sat at the top of it all. Although we likely wouldn't be spending too much time in the cabin, it was such a nice place to just sit back and relax when we really needed it. The next morning, later than most people got up to head out, Carter and Sam led our small group through the trails. Although it was cold, there wasn't any call for snowfall. Even so, as we walked, our boots made a lot of noise as we crushed the half-frozen foliage, branches, and grass. That didn't really matter though, as we weren't too concerned with how much noise we were making. Rather, we were more concerned with staying together and at whatever conversation was going on at the time. We'd stop every once in a while to talk with other hikers, or take pictures of the views, or just get a snack from our packs. Unlike the others, I took pictures as we walked. Mostly candid photos of the group or the scenery in motion rather than posed. At one point, we sat on a few rocks that gave us a nice view of the stream below for one final snack before heading back to the cabin. We had plans to take naps before heading out into the nearby river for some quality afternoon fishing before finishing off the day with a good old-fashioned campfire. Anyway, I was going through the pictures I had taken between the bites of my snacks, as I hadn't been able to go through them as we walked. I finished my snack before the others and leaned against Joe, listening to the others' conversations as I continued to page through the images. Most of them were pretty good, with some being stellar and others trash-worthy. I showed the others some of the better ones, especially the ones that contained one or more of the group. They were passing the camera around, going through the pictures, and holding the device with care. Micah? Ray spoke up, stopping the conversation in its tracks and turning all eyes to the one with the camera in hand. He looked over to me, with wide eyes and a look of fear on his colorless features. You didn't look at them all, did you? I shook my head. Look at this, he said, holding the camera to me. I pushed myself off Joe and took the device from him with an arched eyebrow. He just pursed his lips and looked down as though to tell me just to look. My eyes shifted from my pale friend down to my camera. The image looked like one of the other dozens of candid group shots, but the second my gaze turned to the screen, I noticed something that I must have missed before. Seeing it now, I couldn't believe that this thing went unnoticed before. There was no way that all 6 of us missed it as we walked down the dirt trail. It was just beyond the tree line, in the darkness offered by the shadows of the thick trees and leaves. The thing looked to be shaped like a person, but it seemed to be lanky and tall, despite the fact that it was crouched over. Any of its other descriptive features were difficult to make out due to the camera's focus being on the center of the group, who happened to be Sam at the time, rather than the tree line. What I could make out, though, didn't make me think that this thing was human. The image, as grainy as it was, struck me with a sort of primal fear that made my heart hammer violently against my ribcage. What the hell is that? That thing? Joe's voice sounded terrified as she struggled to get the words out properly. I'd never heard her voice break like it did in that moment. The sense of fear only made it all that much more terrifying. Nobody saw it? I signed, looking to the others. There's no way we'd see that and just keep walking, Carter said after taking a look at the image. Why the hell didn't we see that? Nobody had any theories as to how we could have missed something like that. They all just stayed silent, and I felt frozen for a moment as my mind tried to get a grip on what was going on. It could have been a trick of the light or some sort of image malfunction. After all, the camera was an old one, which was the whole reason I took it out on the hike in the first place. When I reminded the others of this fact, they all seemed to relax a little. Despite this, we packed up and took another trail as we made our way back to the cabin. This one took a little longer than before, so we ended up back a little later than we expected, but we didn't see anything. Though I was afraid to check the other pictures, there was nothing to be afraid of, as the thing didn't make another appearance in the camera roll. By the time we got to bed that night, it was pretty late in the evening, but we strategically kept a handful of lights on so that they acted like makeshift nightlights. Although we had worked to distance ourselves from that particular event of the day, I know that when I laid in bed, it was difficult to turn my mind off. Joe and I rolled over to face one another and went on with a silent conversation in hopes of taking our minds off the image. Somehow, we both managed to fall asleep, but as you probably could have guessed, it didn't last long. Well into the evening, after remaining asleep for some time, I was awoken by a sound that I couldn't for the life of me remember. As soon as my eyes had opened, and the gears of my mind shifted into high gear, the memory of the sound had vanished. All I did know was that it had happened, and whatever it was loud enough to wake even a heavy sleeper such as myself. Joe was already upright beside me, looking to be listening intently as though for a repeat of the noise. Just as I pushed myself up onto my elbows, trying to look around and see what could have been the source. Nothing looked out of place or even odd in any sense. It only made the feeling of terror that much worse. Do you... Joe had started to speak, but it seemed that at the very moment she opened her mouth, a terrifying scream broke through the cabin. We bolted from our bed and never ran as fast as we did, tearing through the halls and bursting into the room Ray and Logan were sleeping in. They were on their feet, with Ray standing closer to the door and Logan against the window, seeming to be pressing his hands against it as though to keep it closed. I ran over to his side as Joe tried to get the story out of Ray. Carter and Sam just about ran over one another getting into the room behind us. Ray was crying as he tried to get the story out, but I wasn't paying attention. Instead, I was focused on the window, and just why Logan was pressed against it in such a way. Especially when his friend was on the other side of the room, struggling to keep it together. The moment my eyes switched to look outside, I fully understood why. My heart skipped a beat as my eye focused on the creature that surged back into the tree line. While I hadn't gotten that good of a look at it, I did see the humanoid figure appeared to be running on all fours. It made my body go cold all over, and I felt frozen to the spot where I stood. I looked over to Logan, whose features were pale with wide, watered eyes, focused intently on the forest. Despite the fact that Logan wasn't saying a word, we couldn't seem to process the conversation going on behind us. It took Logan a moment or two before he could step back from the window, releasing his iron-tight grip on it. I didn't even realize that I was shaking until Logan rested a hand on my shoulder, trying to steady his own racing heart. A mere glance told me he was sweating, despite the intense cold of not only the surrounding area, but the inside of the cabin as well. I turned to the others to try to get a better idea of what the hell just happened. As it turns out, Ray was awoken by a sound outside, likely the same noise that had caused the rest of us to wake up. Logan, being a little slower on his own awakening, was struggling to open his eyes where he lay beside him. So, for a little while, Ray would be on his own, so he went over to the window to get a better idea of the animal running around outside. In his half-asleep state, he couldn't even begin to consider the idea that the thing from the picture could have possibly been out there. When he pressed against the window, trying to look out into the darkness, he couldn't see a damn thing. He said he was so busy cursing as he threw open the heavy window that he didn't at first hear the sounds of branches snapping. By the time he did, it was already too late. There the creature was, just a few feet away from the wall, about halfway into the yard. Ray said it was just standing there, staring at him with dark eyes that couldn't have been natural. The thing had been tall, he guessed almost 7 feet tall, and had a gaunt, lanky form with limbs that were all too long to fit even with the thing's tall form. For what could have been just a second too long, Ray couldn't move. He felt like his whole body was rooted to the floor, as fear dug deep into his bones. His frozen body started to shake, and he was unable to control the tremble that coursed through him and made his whole body run cold. When the creature started to move, Ray let out the scream that caused everyone else in the house to bolt out of their beds. Logan's half-asleep state had vanished as he threw the covers off and ran to Ray's aid, slamming the window shut just as that thing's hand had reached the glass. Logan said that the thing tried to get inside, though seemed unable to understand how the window worked. It ran off the moment Joanna and I nearly broke down the door. Sam stayed with Ray as the rest of us searched around the house to find any traces that the creature might have still been roaming around. The only thing we found was deep scratches along the wall beneath and around the window it nearly got through. Carter tried his best to figure out what sort of creature this thing was. Even though he was the reigning outdoorsman of the group, having spent his childhood in the woods with his father, nothing made any sense, he said. With how Ray described it, the scratches should have been long but shallow, given its gaunt form and lanky form. The deep scratches just didn't make any sense, and even non-outdoorsmen like me could only agree. We searched the perimeter of the property and found no other signs of the creature, so we made our way back. Carter grabbed the gun his father kept in the cabin, loaded it, and rested it against the living room wall. We all slept together in the living room as none of us could bear to sleep even in pairs. I know I wasn't the last to fall asleep, but even I stayed up well into the early hours of the morning. Every time I managed to close my eyes, all I could see was an image of that thing running back into the forest. I couldn't imagine how Ray and Logan got any sleep either. It was about midday when I finally woke up, only to find that the curtains had only been drawn closed as to keep out the morning light. Scattered around me were the passed out forms of Logan, Ray, and Sam. The others, it seemed, were awake and mobile. It must have been one of them who drew the curtains close, to let the rest of us get even a few more hours of much-needed sleep. I quietly made my way into the kitchen, careful not to wake the others as I moved. Due to the sudden change in lighting from the living room to the kitchen, my pace was slowed to a stop as I covered my eyes and groaned. Still, I appreciated the light more in all its painful forms. Everything was less terrifying in the daylight. We did our best to keep our minds off what happened, and to do that, we hardly even went near the forest for that day's events. Instead, we spent our time fishing and canoeing in the nearby lake. Although Ray seemed distracted, no matter how hard we tried to keep him included, Logan and myself were able to enjoy ourselves. After all, Logan and I had a theory that if we faked happiness long enough, it would be real. And we were right. On the other hand, this concept seemed much more difficult for Ray, but considering just what he saw, we were surprised he was enjoying himself as much as he was. At one point, we were sitting out on the small dock at the edge of the water with a few of us in lawn chairs we'd brought. I was sitting with my legs off the side of the sturdy wooden dock, with my fishing rod in hand, and Logan sitting beside me. Carter on the far side leaned against the railing to smoke a cigarette, being nice enough to put some space between us and his smoke. Sam was sitting in the lawn chair, playing cards with Ray, who sat in one beside her. A small collapsible table resting between them. Joe had just returned from the cabin with a canister in hand and poured me a hot drink before pouring herself one. After handing me my cup, she collapsed into her own lawn chair with a sigh. It was so peaceful. "Spiked?" I asked, leaning back and looking over to Joe, who was grinning. "I thought it would keep you warm," she said with a wink. Logan groaned dramatically as he playfully pushed me away, never taking his eyes off the water. "Tell us to get a room and I'll kick you into the lake." Now, I'm no lightweight by any means, but as my gaze lazily shifted across the lake, I could have sworn that the liquor had gotten to me. At least, that was what I tried to tell myself anyway. The image was quick and looked like it had darted back into the bush the moment my gaze caught it. No, I think my gaze was caught by the quick movement, as if it had moved before that. I was snapped back to reality when something started pulling on the previously dead fishing line. With how long my hook had been in the water, it seemed odd that now all of a sudden it would catch something. Setting my drink down, I started to reel the line in, wondering what would be on the other end of it. The others were all focused on me now as I managed to reach out, grab the line, and tug the object out of the water with force. The scream that tore through my throat was deafening, On the end of the line was an animal that looked like it had been mangled beyond repair. I nearly threw the entire rod and scrambled to an uneasy standing position. Logan mimicked my movements, and we backed away from the edge of the deck as the others had nearly overturned their chairs, getting to their feet. My heartbeat was pounding in my ears, and I did my best to rationalize what I'd seen. It's not like seeing a mangled animal in the woods was a totally odd thing, but it was in this area of the woods. This was a community area where there were limits on where people could hunt and the sort of animals that made their way through. Even this body of water was pretty closed off from the rest of the woods, meaning that the limits controlled it. There was no way that the animal could have been mangled in this community and dropped in the water to have drifted over to us. Even if all of that was true, that the animal was somehow attacked and dropped into the water, how did it get latched onto my hook and manage to pull? The rod was slipping into the water, and something made me launch over to snag it. Had it not been for Joanna's quick hand gripping the back of my shirt, I might have fallen into the cold but shallow water. It was a good thing that I hadn't, because in those moments, when I was suspended in the air before Joe pulled me back into the dock, I noticed a figure lurking beneath the surface of the lake. I blinked and it was gone, but its form was undeniable. My footing was off as I was pulled back, but I blame it on the figure to explain why I slipped and landed hard at Joanna's feet. The rod clambered onto the wood by my own feet, and, almost reflexively, I kicked it away as I scrambled back into my girlfriend's legs. We all just stayed frozen in our spots, eyes locked on the rod. Mine were locked in the shadow-like figure in the water. I could hear the rapid breathing coming from the others as they tried to control their heart rates to varying degrees of success. My own breathing was intense, but I tried to slow it, not for my racing heart, but for the pain in my throat from the scream. The figure just stayed there, and though I couldn't see its eyes, it was staring at me. When it did move, it pulled the rod into the water. We had never gathered our things and ran out of an area faster than we did in those moments. Although we wanted nothing more than to get the hell out of there, we decided to stay one more night in the cabin to ensure that we got home without any sleep-deprived accidents. After all, driving at night in this area was difficult enough with a group of well-rested drivers. Even if we drove home the next morning, tired as all hell, we'd be better off with the sunlight keeping those hellish roads visible. Deciding that the final night of our little vacation wasn't going to be ruined, we sat around the campfire Carter had worked so hard on setting up earlier that day. Although we made s'mores as the night before, we did not drink liquor, and instead just stayed with a round of hot drinks. That seemed to be the only thing from keeping cold muscles from tensing any more than they already were. Although the conversation flowed pretty well, anyone listening would be able to easily tell that we were very distracted. Turns out that the thing really was going to ruin our last night of freedom. Slowly, throughout the course of the evening, we started to relax a little. Though we were still on guard, we didn't feel the need to keep constantly looking over our shoulders to see if we were being watched. We all knew, or at least we all hoped, that we would feel such a thing, as we always had with other humans or animals. Carter still had his hunting rifle across his lap, though, and while he wasn't clutching it tightly anymore, he was still ready to use it at any moment. That thing alone was enough to send a shiver down the length of my spine. About halfway through our little campfire, right after downing the first few s'mores, I had the urge to go to the bathroom, So I headed back to the cabin. But Joanna, the knight in shining armor that she was, decided to come with me. Looking back, it's a good thing she did. I don't know where I'd be now if it wasn't for her protective nature. She was sitting outside, likely against the wall on her phone, as I did my business in the bathroom. While I felt safer with her sitting just a few feet away, there was something gnawing at me, as though to tell me that it wasn't as safe as I thought. I brushed it off as paranoia, but nonetheless finished up quickly. It happened the moment I turned the water off after I finished washing my hands. To be honest, I think it had been going on before that. The loud noise caused by the pipes just blocked the sound from hitting my ears. I say that because the sound, once the water stopped, seemed to be in the middle of its motion, like whatever was causing it was just finishing its own movement. It was coming from just outside the window, and since the bathroom sat on the first floor, I knew that whatever was out there was too close for comfort. My whole body froze, and I felt rooted to the ground for a moment. Then I did something I never thought I would ever do, and something that could have easily gotten me killed. I marched over to the window and threw it open with force. The noise echoed through the house, and I heard Joanna scramble to her feet outside before she threw open the door. I wasn't paying much attention to that though, not even a glance over my shoulder in her direction. My gaze was focused on the thing that had leapt back from the window, at my sudden movements, and the loud sounds they created. Instead of scurrying back into the woods, as it so often did, the creature stood up. All the confidence I had mustered up drained from me, causing my legs to go weak. It was tall and inhumanely lanky, with a dark, thick-looking skin that Ray had described. There was something about it that seemed unnatural. If I knew anything, it was that this creature didn't belong, and that terrified me more than anything else. The creature's dark, lifeless eyes were barring into mine, and it felt like it was looking right into my core. "Go!" I managed to tell it with enough force for the sound to reach the creature. My voice had not sounded so broken since the first time I tried to speak in the hospital after the accident. The creature seemed to make a noise, but from where I couldn't tell, because it had no mouth to speak from. It made the same noise once more, and this time, I could fully understand what it had said, and I felt a wave of nausea flood through me. "Michelle, help me. I need help. He's hurting me." Joanna sprung to life and grabbed me with one arm wrapped around my neck and a hand over my eyes. I had no idea what the hell was going on until she was dragging me away, screaming for the others at the top of her lungs. She sounded utterly terrified, and, without looking, I could hear the strain in her voice as tears likely ran down her cheeks. As before, I had no idea what was happening, but there was no use in fighting her. We got out of the room, and she let go of me to slam the door shut as the others piled in. "Get your shit!" she yelled to them, in the commanding tone that cemented her as one of the group parents. "We're leaving now. I don't care if we all have to take half-hour shifts. We're getting the hell out of here." That was all it took for everyone to run around the house, getting our things together and getting them outside. We left the food we'd brought in the kitchen and some stray things in the living room, but they were easily replaceable. Carter brought his rifle on the drive home instead of locking it back up, and the whole time he was cursing about how he would have to explain everything to his parents. That didn't stop any of us from how fast we were moving to get out of there. I was the last to run out of the building, throwing Carter's bag into the front car before booking it back to Joe's car, which sat a few feet away. Her scream was the last thing I heard before I felt my leg violently tugged out from under me. I landed in the snow face first, with a dog-like yelp escaping my raw throat. My free leg instantly went out as I tried to kick the thing away from me, terrified to look back, but I had to. My eyes locked on the creature, and its form is something I won't soon forget. In fact, it haunts my nightmares to this day. The creature looked more inhuman than ever, with its limbs contorted at angles that would break any normal person's bones in several pieces. That damn long arm reached up to me, and before I knew it, the claws reached to my back, but I twisted before they could sink into my skin. Instead, the claws caught my left arm, and while I know I screamed, I can't remember what it sounded like. A loud shot rang through the air, causing the creature's hand to pull back violently. It moved off of me at a slower speed than it had showcased before, but it was able to get back into the tree line as the others had surrounded me. Joe hauled me to the back seat of the car as Sam leapt into the front seat. We got the hell out of there as Joanna did her best to patch me up. Despite Joe's attempts to keep me awake, I passed out in the back seat of the SUV. I woke up in the hospital a few days later, and the doctor had told me that I was attacked by an animal and shouldn't have been out drinking in such an area. Turns out the others had lied to the doctor about what happened, fearing that he wouldn't believe them and thus wouldn't let them see me. My arm had some serious damage from the creature's attack, leading the doctors to believe that whatever got to me was large and powerful. Even after years of physical therapy, that arm still doesn't function how it used to, but has become more manageable over the years. What I couldn't shake were the words the creature had said to me, the ones it used to try to lure me out with it into the forest. They were the same words that my little sister had said to me a few years back, when her playmate in the street had pushed her over to get the ball from her. How it could have known that was a mystery to everyone, as only Joanna had ever even heard about that story. After those experiences in the cabin, I started to experience things. Unnatural things. Shadows in the corners of rooms. Figures moving about. Voices that seemed to come from nowhere. And even kids playing when there were no kids to be found. I have no idea what that thing did to me. The reason I'm finally writing this is because I saw something last night. I think that the creature we encountered at Carter's cabin isn't up there anymore, and hasn't been for some time. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you want to see more, let me know in the comments below, and tell me what you thought of this narration. Make sure to follow me on Twitter for updates, and if you'd like to get early videos, shoutouts, and much more, I'd appreciate it if you check out my Patreon page. It's a place where you can help support my channel while getting awesome rewards in the process, and every pledge helps out a ton, no matter the size. So if you'd like to see all the rewards I offer and consider becoming a patron, it'd mean a ton to me if you'd click the link in the description and just check it out. And don't forget to show some love to the amazingly talented authors who make these narrations possible. Have a good night, everybody. Cheers.